Today I want to share one of my favorite long-term food storage items with you. You might guess already from what I've got surrounding me, it's winter squash. I love to grow winter squash because they're tasty, but also for the long-term storage they offer. I come from a family who, when I was growing up, my mother, Granny, she put up food all summer long so that we would have food for the winter. My grandmothers did that, my aunts, different people in the, in the community. That was just kind of a common way of life, and still is. If you see someone who has a large garden, you can bet that they're putting up food for food storage for winter use. Now sometimes that food that we can and we put on the shelves, like for instance right now on my shelves, my canning shelves, I have food that wasn't all eaten in 2020. That food is still good. So sometimes it lasts longer than the winter. It'll last on into the next year even, especially those canned items. Well, it's the same way with winter squash. So most winter squash, if you kind of look at the general consensus of things, they will say that once they're cured, if they're stored properly, they will last up to 6 months. Well, these that I'm surrounded by, the pumpkin, the butternut, and my green striped cushaw here, some folks call it a kershaw, these were grown in 2021. This is the 5th month of 2022, so you can see these have lasted longer than 6 months. And I love that versatility. I love that I'm able to save. This is a lot of food right here, when you think about how big it is, or that pumpkin. But even a butternut squash, that's quite a bit of food. And I'm able to store that for my family through the winter by not having to do that extra work of canning. Of course I could cut these up and put them in the freezer or dry them or whatever. But if I kind of to save time, if I don't want to do that, and you only have so many jars and you only have so much freezer space, this is a great way to just have extra food storage sitting around. Now I make a garden every year, so I grew these. If you don't have space for a garden, you could certainly look at your local farmer's market and places like that to pick up winter squash. But if you are a gardener, they are one of the easiest plants, I think, to grow, whether it's the pumpkin, the kershaw, or the butternut squash, or any of the other winter squash. And why do I think they're easy? Because they're kind of one of those plants that you get to plant. You plant them in the spring like now, and they have a long growing season, and you only harvest them once. So like this grew all summer last year, and I didn't harvest it until the end of the summer, maybe even September, I can't remember. So there it was, just laying out there in the garden waiting on me to harvest it. That's not the same if you're a gardener. You know that if you have tomatoes and okra and squash and green beans and peppers and all those things, you have to constantly stay on top of that. You have to keep picking them so that they'll continue to produce. So that's a constant thing that you have to do. It's a joy. It's a wonderful thing, but it's a busy time. Anybody that grows a garden knows that it's a really busy time. So these are kind of neat in that you just plant them and kind of forget about them. Now, the leaves, they have huge leaves. You do need to have a large space for them to kind of roam around in, but the leaves are really big. And what happens to those leaves is that they shade out a lot of the weeds, so there's not much weeding. You do have to worry about if you're someone that's your area is prone to having squash bugs. That might be an issue for you. There's a lot of videos with tips about how to combat that. Also, if you have groundhogs or maybe deer or something like that, but those are things you have to worry about with any sort of plant that you're growing in the garden. So once they're grown, you may be wondering, well, how do you harvest them? How do you store them? How do you get them to last that long? Well, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, and if you do a search, you'll find people that are very particular with how they do it. They rinse them off, maybe they wipe peroxide or something like that and really clean them, and they have a wonderful, maybe a pantry or a root cellar or something like that to sit them in. I don't have any of that, and I don't do any of that. What I do, which works very well for me, is so that I wait when I'm about to harvest, which is in the fall, in the end of summer, until the stem coming to the butternut or whatever it is, the pumpkin, literally dries and withers. Sometimes they break off, and I leave them and they're just laying there when I come back to pick them up, when I finally think I need to harvest those today. So then they've been laying out there for that time. Then once I do that, I brush off the dirt. I don't wash them or wet them or anything like that. I brush off the dirt, and then I have a covered porch, a long porch that, it has a roof on it, so it's covered, and I set them on the porch. And they usually stay out there for several weeks. Until one day I realized if I don't get in my winter squash, they're going to freeze. You know, cold weather's coming. So once that happens and I decide I need to bring them inside, I do bring them inside. I don't have a big pantry or a cellar or anything. I do have a basement, but it's very damp, so I would never put them down there. But what I do is I just sit them around my kitchen. So if you watch my videos often, and you know sometimes you see the white cabinet behind me, the kind of the little small china cabinet type thing, this one has been sitting right beside it, along with a few others that have already been eaten, but that's where it's been sitting. These butternuts have just been sitting around my kitchen in different locations. The big pumpkin actually has been in my foyer, just sitting in the foyer waiting for the day that I'm going to actually eat it or harvest it and decide what to do with it. Now, one of the keys I've found to letting them just kind of sit around, they're not in the dark or anything like that. Maybe those kind of places, if you had a place like that, might even make them last longer. But either way, what I've found key over the years of growing winter squash is to keep them, is that you kind of have to keep a check on them. So every once in a while, I'll pick them up and kind of look at them and feel of them and make sure there's no bad places, there's no soft spots. And so what do I do if there is a soft spot? Well, right here where I'm at now, at my kitchen island, there's a bottom shelf, and on that bottom shelf I had 2 large pumpkins. They were about this big. When I ended my growing season last year, I had a giant candy roaster. Some of the ones that I harvested, I went ahead and cut up and froze, made puree, put it in the freezer, dried some of them. But those were some of the ones that was sitting on this island that had been left. Well, one day when I was checking, I realized, of course not on the same day at different points, but I would realize, oh, there's a little bitty soft spot just starting right there on that pumpkin. So then what did I do? I got the pumpkin and I cut it up and I went ahead and harvested. I went ahead and chopped it up and cooked some of it, put some of it in the freezer, dried some of it. And even though that little spot was there, what I did was, this is what Granny, when I was growing up, how I was raised, is waste not, want not. So the same as I would do for a fresh tomato, if I was putting up tomatoes, you know, if it's a day of canning and I have a big huge pile of tomatoes to can, when you grow food yourself, it's not perfect. It's not like the out of the book example where it's showing you this is a tomato. There's blemishes and there's little spots and different things. So when that happens, I just cut that place out and then I go ahead and can the tomato. So it's the same with these. When I cut up the pumpkin that day, when I realized there was a little soft spot, I cut that little soft spot out and discarded it. And then I cut up the rest of the pumpkin and put it up. Another great point about growing winter squash, especially the largest ones, is like I was saying a minute ago, I think I already said, that how big they are, how much food is just in this, how much food is in this. Well, I harvested one of mine from over in the corner last week, and what I was able to do with one this size, about the exact same size, is once I chopped it up that night, I can't remember exactly what I was having for supper, but I made roasted cushaw to go with it. Then I chopped up the rest of it, and the next day I made a pot of soup with it. We ate on that soup for probably 2 days, 3 days even, because I think Corey ate some over the weekend. And then I had enough left to make another run of soup, and I put that in the freezer. So there's quite a bit of food in the, you know, a winter squash this size, especially the size of the pumpkin. I should also mention the seeds are edible. So you've probably heard of roasted pumpkin seeds, but this winter squash, you can also roast those seeds and eat them. And then, of course, you know, you can save them to plant again next year, have more winter squash. And really, winter squash, whether it's a cushaw or a pumpkin or even a butternut, they have so many seeds in them that there's plenty to save 2 or 3 seeds and then roast and eat the rest. And in that same way that they're a joy to grow if you're a busy gardener and you've got other things that need to be harvested constantly and took care of, it's the same for actually putting up food. So when those things like tomatoes start coming in or green beans, you know, you're just covered up with canning and breaking up the beans and doing the tomatoes. All those things are so busy. Well, since they do last, it's wonderful to be able to actually store them for food all through the winter, just in case you need it, like I've done these. But also to just let them sit until there comes a day where you're like, okay, all the garden's been put to sleep, the green beans have all been canned, I've already made kraut, whatever it is you're doing, and now I've got my breath, and now I'm going to tackle putting up the winter squash. So what are some of my favorite ones to grow? Well, these three right here are actually my favorite ones to grow. I love to grow butternut squash, and I usually grow the Waltham. Waltham is the variety, although thanks to the generosity of one of my neighbors down the road, Tim Stalkup, he has butternut squash seed that has been passed down in his family for generations. He grows them every year. So one year, of course, he shared some of his butternut squash with me and Granny, and I made sure to save the seeds. So some of the ones I grow are from that seed that Tim shared with me. Now, butternut squash, if you don't have a garden, like I said, you can look at your local farmer's market, but even grocery stores usually have butternut squash. My other favorite one to grow is this green and white striped cushaw. I first grew this. One of my Blind Pig and the Acorn readers years ago gave me seed for a green and white striped one, but also for a white one. It looks just like this, but it's white. And those I really love. Bill Dotson's who gave me the seed. I appreciate him. He shared a lot with me through the years. But I really love those. But that seed is readily available, so you could find it. And then the pumpkins that I like to grow. This is a Chambers Creek pumpkin, which is from Swain County, North Carolina. And again, a friend, Don Cassida, shared the seed with me, and I really enjoy it. It's got great flavor. And along with pumpkins, I kind of mentioned it a minute ago, I love to grow candy roasters. I have a video about candy roasters you can check out if you've not seen it. I will link to it. But so a candy roaster is kind of like a pumpkin, only better is what I say. So it grows kind of like in a long tube shape, and they can get, the one that I had that I just recently put up was about this big, so they can get really large too. Another variety of pumpkin that I really like is Seminole pumpkin. Again, a Blind Pig reader, Cheryl, shared that seed with me years ago. And if you don't have a lot of room, you can grow, I like the flavor of the little sugar pumpkins, I believe is the name of them. Let's see if I've got any seed laying here. Sugar pumpkin, and while they're very small, they also have good flavor, but they just get to be about this big, so they're really good. Like if you think about fall decoration and decor and your Thanksgiving table and things like that, they're really pretty just to have sitting around, but they're tasty too, and they're small, so they're easy to kind of more compact growing, but also they're just easier to handle instead of when you think about cutting a pumpkin this big. And some of the ones I want to try this year that I'm going to try, I'll be growing all of these, but I want to try, Katie got me two for Christmas. One is a winter squash sweetmeat. I've never tried that one, so I'm going to try that. And I'm not sure if that's a big one or a small one, so I'll have to see. The packet that she got me does not say. If you know, please tell me. And the other one is Mrs. Amerson's. And I'm not sure if that's a small one or a large one. I'm just going to plant one or two of those and I'll find out. And then a subscriber shared with me Long Island cheese pumpkin, and he said him and his family really loved it, so I'm going to try that one. So I hope that you enjoyed learning about one of in my arsenal of food storage, and especially long-term food storage. As I said, it's pretty amazing when you think about this is still firm and nice and good, because I just cut up the other one about a week ago. And I grew it last year, so that's pretty amazing. Now, if you had a larger place to store them than I do, you could probably do a better job. I mean, you could certainly have more. And maybe some of those tricks about washing them off and all that, you can do some research and decide for yourself. Maybe those things really help even lengthen the time that you can keep them. But I'm typically too lazy or too busy to actually go that step. But my favorite thing about growing them, other than the taste, is that the long-term storage, but also that they're so easy to take care of in the garden. Once you plant them, you kind of get to forget about them and just check on them every once in a while, and then harvest them. And then after you harvest them, it's not like, oh my gosh, all the tomatoes have to be put up today or they're going to go bad. You know that they give you a little time. So it's just really one of my favorite things when you think about the long-term food storage. Today we're all thinking about that. All of us are kind of second guessing and giving our food supply a second thought. So it's just a wonderful thing. And this is the time of the year for you to get started if you want to try winter squash this year. I hope, as always, you'll continue to drop back by often and help me celebrate Appalachia, which is just a whole lot of Appalachian foodways, and really a lot of them are really based in putting up food, making a garden, and eating what the good earth gives you.